Shalom Aleichem. We are in Hilchot Talmud Torah Perek He, Halacha Zayin. The halacha begins with the words "Ulo kol mi shebeth rabo." Okay, because this is more or less a new section or new theme. Either halacha Zayin in Hilchot Talmud Torah Perek He, or in other editions, halacha Gimel. V'lo kol mi shemeth rabo mutar lo leshev ulehoroch b'Torah. So a Talmid Chachamim, a student of the Chachamim, that is the original term, Talmid Chachamim, not Talmid Chacham, because the meaning of the term is a person who studies the words of the Chachamim in general. Obviously doesn't study or is not aware of only the teachings of the words of one particular Chacham. And even if he only knows one Chacham, that Chacham himself is conveying to him the teachings and essential ideas and fundamentals which are the product of many generations of many Chachamim. So however this person came to study Torah, he is a Talmid of Chachamim. So if you have a Talmid Chachamim and his Rav passed away, can he immediately assume that he is now allowed to be posek halacha, to be moreh hora'ah? Because that was what we discussed in the previous halacha. In which situation is a Talmid permitted to begin teaching Torah publicly and instructing people halachically? So Rambam says, "V'lo kol mi shemeth rabo mutar lo leshev ulehoroch b'Torah." It doesn't work that way. That simply because your Rav is no longer in this world, that now you have permission to do so. Previously, we discussed receiving such permission from the Rav, because the Rav knows whether this Talmid is able to do so, whether he will be able to teach Torah to the benefit of all, or whether teaching Torah on his part is in fact not a benefit, but in fact a danger, because he will lead people astray. And that, of course, is very serious. One cannot stress enough how serious that is. In some ways, teaching Torah in a general sense, in other words, making all kinds of general pronouncements pertaining to, shall we say, the essential philosophy or outlook of the Torah on many issues, on many ideas, many areas of life. Such a thing in many ways is more serious than teaching or misteaching a specific halacha, even though that's also serious. But if a person pontificates on all sorts of things, expressing various notions, things which are half-baked or not baked at all, then this can set up many people, sometimes for life, with a totally spurious understanding of some of the most fundamental things. So when can such a Talmid begin to disseminate Torah? So Rambam says again, "V'lo kol mi shemeth rabo," here we're Halacha Zayin, and mark it out on the screen. ולא כל מי שמeth רבו מותר לו לשב ולהורות בתורה, אלא אם כן היה תלמיד שהגיע להוראה, unless he has been מגיע, literally he has achieved that level. Where he's able to instruct people and give a psak halacha. וכל תלמיד שלא הגיע להוראה ומורה, a talmid who has not achieved that level and nevertheless goes ahead and teaches and instructs, הרי זה שוטה, such a person is a fool. Rasha, and also he should be considered to be a Rasha, وغس ruach, and haughty, arrogant. وعلو نأمار, and it's Hazal would doresh this pasuk with regards to such a person from Mishneh, ki rabim halolim hipila. There, the pasuk in Mishneh, in this literal sense, is talking about a woman of dubious morals who leads men astray. And there are different interpretations, different perushim as to what the mashal, if it's to be taken only literally, because in its literal sense it is also true, obviously. Women have a tremendous impact on the general tone of society. But it's also understood by many, including the Rambam, in Moreh Nevuchim. He discusses this pasuk, and Rambam understands this to be a mashal about human frailty in general, not just that specific example of human frailty, but human frailty in general, to be drawn by, attracted to all manner of things which pertain to his appetites and desires, even when it is asur and clearly wrong. And the Sefer Mishneh is discussing how a person must not follow his ta'awuth, his base desires, and these that they cannot be allowed to regulate his life. Hazal took this pasuk and would doresh this pasuk with reference to a talmid shelo higia lehora'ah, that by teaching and by giving psak halacha, which is incorrect, it's as if he is compared to a person who causes many to die. In other words, he leads many astray and causes them and brings about their downfall. Spiritually, halachically, he causes them to do something which is asur or what have you. Now the continuation of that pasuk is wa'asumim kol harugeha. In other words, that pasuk literally states such a woman, a wayward woman, leads many astray and literally kills them, brings about their downfall. وَعَسُّمِمْ كَلْ هَرُوبَهَا, and many are those that she has caused them to die or to fall, or many has she killed. So Chazal continued the mashal and they say, and Rambam quotes here, وَخَيْنْ حَخَمْ شَهِجِيَ لُهَرَا وَإِنَا مُرَى. On the other hand, Hacham, and here Rambam just very deliberately chooses the word Hacham, not Talmid. A moment ago he said Talmid. Now here he says Hacham. So with regards to a Talmid, shelo higia lehora'ah, such a person is a shoteh and a rasha v'gas ruach. Because if he's behaving in this way when he shouldn't be, then it must be because he seeks status, power, fame, what have you. Otherwise, why would he do it? V'chen hacham shehigia lehora'ah ve'eno moreh, and a hacham who is worthy and able to of teaching and giving a psak halacha, and he does not do so. In other words, he's overly cautious, perhaps overly humble. There is a point where that humility itself becomes a problem. Such a person really is preventing Torah from, in other words, he's limiting Torah. He's preventing people from studying, knowing, understanding Torah, because he could teach them, and he fears that maybe I didn't understand, maybe I don't know. So up to a point, that's a positive attribute. Beyond a certain point, no. And thus he leads people astray, because he leaves them in a state of blindness, literally. They don't know, and he could set them straight. And about such person it says, the other half of the pasuk, and many are those that she, the pshat of the pasuk, that she brought down or killed. There is a powerful question, or an important point, and a question that should be raised here. So how does a person know? So in an ideal situation, if a Talmud has a Rav who is a very serious Chacham, over a period of time, usually a long period of time, the Chacham gets to know the Talmud and is familiar with his level and his understanding and his behavior, etc. And the Chacham will tell him when he's Ra'ul L'Lmid Torah. And in other words, when he says so, he's giving him Rashut, he's giving him permission to do so. And this has to do with the halachot that we learned previously, such as in halacha Gimel, for example, לפיכך אמרו כל החולק על רבו כחולק על השכינה, וכל העושה מריבה עם רבו כעושה עם השכינה. In other words, the Talmud is instructed to be very meek and accept the authority of the Rav, and on the one hand. On the other hand, the Rav at some point should tell him that I'm giving you Rishuth. She will not be considered to be Holek al Rabbecha, as it says here in Halacha Daled, Ezohu Holek al Rabbo, Zeh shekoveh lo midrash. In other words, a yeshiva, Yoshev u'doresh u'melamed shelo b'rshut Rabbo. So the Rav, who is without a doubt Hacham, She'ino b'rosho, he sees the reality and understands that this Talmud should now be able to teach. So he gives him Rashut to do so. And that was the concept of Samichat Chachamim, where the Chacham, or a number of Chachamim, would place their hands on the head, literally, of the Talmud, and give him this Rashut to teach, to be Moreh Hora'ah. So it used to be a very personal and subject, to some extent, subjective. In other words, it was the Rav who decided when this Talmud has achieved that level. Over time, this became less and less the standard reality, and this is where the idea of samicha comes from, or what's called today a samicha. One of the problems with the current system is something which should be familiar to many people from the academic world of today, namely that tremendous pressure is brought to bear on the Talmid Hachamim to conform to certain notions, accept certain premises. And basically, people are taught that there's only one position or one interpretation. So the psak is Aleph, and you cannot say or you cannot express a different opinion. And this brings about a tremendous cognitive a lowering of the cognitive standard of the level of understanding of Torah, because people are basically taught not to think and not to really understand. And this is in fact a tremendous problem. One of the very greatest problems, I think, in the Torah world today and for quite some time. It's completely different, for example, from what we see in the time of the Rishonim. Also, if you look, the Tanaim and Amoraim, likewise, but closer to our own time, in the time of the Rishonim, and also, if truth be told, in the time of the Aharonim, you have a huge range of views and opinions on many, many things. That you do not have this uniformity and conformity. Even on the most basic questions. And that is how it should be, because the Torah should be about pursuing truth and truly understanding the matter at hand. Whereas if you tell people, it doesn't really make any difference how much you look into something and understand it deeply and what conclusions you might reach, that doesn't really count for anything, because in the end you're going to have to say and express this particular view. In which case, why would the person bother? In fact, most young students are not taught to not even shown how to look into something serious in a serious manner. So this, of course, leads to a very unsatisfactory result. So enough about that. Just be aware of those things. Rambam continues. This is now Halakha Heth. I mark it out here on the screen. Elu hatalmidim hakatanim shelo hilbu Torah karaui והם מבקשים להתגדל בפני עמי הארץ ובין אנשי עירם. So as we said, if you have Talmudim who are not worthy of teaching and being moreh hara'ah, of giving psak halacha, unless perhaps on the most simple, straightforward, obvious things. And Rambam says, and so why are they doing this? As we said a moment ago, what they're really aiming for, their aspiration is to build themselves up in terms of their social status, how people will react to them and behave towards them. So they're looking litgadel bifnei amei haaretz. Why bifnei amei haaretz? Because real chachamim know who he is. They understand that he's not the real McCoy, but amei haaretz don't know. So he's mitgadel bifnei amei haaretz uven anshe iram, and people in his locality, his town. Ukofesim uyoshavim barosh ladun ulahorot b'Yisrael, and such people are always very eager. This is an expression that Chazal used, likpotz v'lashevet barosh. In other words, they're quite eager to appoint themselves to be the head of the council or of the debate, or to place themselves above others. Ladun ulahorot b'Yisrael. Such people, hem hamarbim et hamahlakot. Such people lead to mahloket. which is a terrible thing. And they literally destroy the world. They, in a spiritual and ideological sense, they bring great disaster upon Am Yisrael. Literally, they put out, they extinguish the light of the Torah. And they destroy literally Hashem's vineyard. In other words, this refers to Am Yisrael essentially. وعليهم أمر شلمو بخخبثو احزوا لنا شعاليم قتانيم محبليم كراميم. So these expressions that Rambam used are based on this pasuk from Shir HaShirim, which Chazal also quote and adoresh to describe the behavior of such people who are described as small foxes. Foxes are very cunning and adept at getting what they want, and so are such people, and one needs to be aware of this at all times, so as not to be led astray, not to believe everything you hear, not to assume that if such and so is called by such and such a name and is known, is famous, perhaps even, and therefore what this person says is true. It doesn't work that way. Rambam now continues. Another aspect of Kibud Rabo, because this is after all what this Perek began discussing, Kivod Rabo. Another aspect of this is not to call one's Rav by his name. Even if you precede it with the word Harav, shall we say. So let's say his name is Moshe. You don't turn to him and say Harav Moshe. You use some other appellation or reference, but you don't use his name, because this awareness of the distance and the difference in understanding in level, etc., between the Talmud and the Rav has to be maintained. Because this person is Noseh HaTorah. If he's a real Chacham, he's Noseh HaTorah. He carries the Torah with him and within him. And so therefore you do not refer to, even when speaking to someone else about your Rav said such and such, you don't say Harav Moshe Amar Kach V'Kach. You use some other appellation. Nor should he mention the name of the Rav in his presence, even if he's not using it to refer to the Rav, but to somebody else. This is similar to what is required with reference to one's father. Mishum Kibud Av, there is much in common between these two mitzvot of Kibud Rabo and Kibud Aviv. What do you do? Somehow you should change their name and refer to them in some other way. And all this is necessary when the name is an unusual name. Peli means something distant, something difficult to obtain or to attain or to understand. In this sense, in this context, it means a name which is very rare. And therefore, because it is a very rare name, as soon as that name is mentioned, everyone knows that it's referring to that Rav. We will see in a moment what Rambam writes about this in the Hilchot Mamrim. So if it's a name which is most unusual, then this halacha applies. We'll continue. We'll finish this halacha first. V'lo yiten shalom l'rabo. Also, similarly, he should not greet his Rav, or yahazir shalom, or respond to his greeting. Kederach shenotanim horeim u'ma hazirim ze lo ze. So he doesn't turn to his Rav and say, "Hi, how are you?" Something like that, which is how he greets his friends, shall we say? Ela shohelefano. He bows a little bit before him. In other words, he lowers his head and his back somewhat. And he says to him, with the greatest respect, Shalom alecha Rabbi. Lo rabo shalom. And if the Rav responded, Yahazir shalom alecha Yahazir shalom alecha Rabbi Yomari. In other words, if the Rav turned to him and greeted him, and they met on the street, and he greeted him in some way, then he's mahzillo, shalom alecha Rabbi Yomari. Now in Hilchot Mamrim, Perek Shishi, let's look that up just for a moment. In Hilchot Mamrim, Perek Shishi, Rambam discusses Kibud Av V'Em. All right, so this is in Perek Waw Halacha Gimel in Hilchot Mamrim. And here it is before you on the screen. So referring to one's father, Ezahu Mora, or Ezahu Kavod, that we have these two concepts of, we have two Pesukim, we have Kabed Ethavicha Ethimecha, and we have Ishavi wa Imo Tira, we have Yirah, we have Kavod. Rambam writes here in Halacha Gimel, Ezahu Mora, or Ezahu Kavod. Mura lo omed bimkomo. So, with reference to one's father, means lo omed bimkomo, doesn't stand where he usually stands, shall we say, in the Beit Knesset, in the shul. V'lo yoshev bimkomo, and likewise doesn't sit in his place at home as well. V'lo soter et devaro, nor does he contradict what his father says. V'lo machri'a et devaro, nor does he, if his father expresses a doubt or what have you, he comes along and says, I know the correct answer or response or solution to this matter. And he should not call him by his name. A son must not call his father by his name. Not during his lifetime, nor after his death. Ela omer Abba Mari. He should always refer to his father as Abba Mari, my father, my master, and my father. Hayasham Aviu, or Shem Rabo. So you see, this connects to what we're discussing now, because these halachot apply both to one's father and to one's Rav. Hayasham Shem Aviu, or Shem Rabo, Keshem Aherim. If his name was similar to the name of other people to whom he wishes to refer, Mishneh Shemam, he should somehow change their name, the person that he's referring to, so that it should not be, he should not use the same name as of his father or his Rav. And here Rambam writes a chidush, and that's why Rambam begins this statement with the words Yera'eli. Yera'eli always means that what I'm about to tell you, says Rambam, is that which seems correct to me on this matter. I wish to point out, but I have no explicit source in Chazal. If it's something mefurash in Chazal, or one that one can derive from something written in some explicit source, then Rambam would not say Yera'eli. Yera'eli means, I thought of this occurred to me, this seems correct to me, but it's not mefurash. It's not written in the Talmud, it's not written in or even say a teshuvah, one of the Geonim, which the Rambam might quote, in which case he would usually also say that this is what one of the Geonim said, or something like that. Yera'eli she'en nizhar b'chach ela b'shem shehu pali, or pali, she'en hakol dashim bo. That this halakha refers to a name which is unusual, very unusual. She'en hakol dashim bo. In other words, it's not commonly used. It's very rarely used. Aval hashemot shekorim bahem kol ha'am. However, names that are very common, and therefore always many people who go by that name, Kiron, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aharon, v'chayotze b'hem. Those names, b'chol lashon u'b'chol ziman, in all times, in all places, koreh bahem lahirim shelo b'fanam. One is allowed to refer to that person, not to one's father, to that person whose name is Avraham, even though your father's name is also Avraham. You're allowed to refer to them by name. And this is not a problem. It is not an issue. Okay.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Why did the Rambam in Hilchot Mamrim say, or point out that idea was his own chidush and not in Hilchot Talmud Torah, when Hilchot Mamrim comes way after Hilchot Talmud Torah? So I would think he would point that fact out the first time he presented the idea, and not the last time he presented it.
That's a good question, a fair question. I think it has to do with the fact that there are a couple of things that should be said here. First of all, it is true, it is a fact that the Rambam wrote Mishneh Torah, this amazing Hibur called Mishneh Torah. Rambam wrote it without doubt with the intention that people study all of it, not part of it, which is not what many people do, but this is what Rambam says explicitly himself in his own letters to Talmidim and others. It's not unusual, in fact, to find that Rambam omits to mention something here, but mentions it later, or sometimes before, not always before, sometimes later, and he assumes that you will get there fairly soon, and you will see, and therefore you'll put two and two together. It's not, one should not imagine that this is not part of what Rambam had in mind, because Rambam does write explicitly that the intention was that people study the Hibur on a regular basis, and therefore will see everything. So if something comes up in two or three places, he will put together the information in those two or three places, in order not to have to repeat himself every time at length, because he was trying to also keep it as concise as possible. First of all, that is one thing, and that is very true, and we see this in various instances that clearly Rambam mentioned something in one place and not others, and you must understand that Rambam knew that you would see this. Second of all, this halakha, where is it here in Hilchot Talmud Torah? Right. So if we look at it again, halakha teith. So we're talking about asur lo tamid likroth l'rabo bishmo. Here Rambam doesn't go into this halakha. It doesn't mention this chidush in such detail. Here he just says that you do not use the name of your Rav even to refer to others. Ela, he says, Yeshaneh Shemam Wafilu Lahal Mutham, Wahu Sheyeh Hashem Pali or Peli, Shekol HaShomer Yeda Shehu Poloni. That's it. He doesn't say more than that. So you basically have a shortened version of what he wrote in Hilchot Mamrim. I think that we can conclude on the basis of what we see before us that originally Rambam wrote that Hidush in Hilchot Mamrim and decided to add these words briefly here in Hilchot Talmud Torah to convey the same idea, but without repeating himself completely from beginning to end. That's what I think probably happened here. Because first of all, this halakha applies to both. It applies to both to one's Rav and to one's father. So it belongs both in Hilchot Talmud Torah and in Hilchot Mamrim. And I think he probably wrote it first originally in Hilchot Mamrim, and probably later added it here in a much more concise form. So the real chidush in a more complete formulation appears in Hilchot Mamrim and not here. I think that's probably what we should understand. And if you wonder why he didn't say, so you may ask, and it may be a legitimate question, why did not Rambam not write V'hu sheyeh Hashem Peli shekol hashomer yeda shehu poloni kemo shebe'anu b'Hilchot Mamrim, or something like that. Well, first of all, Hilchot Mamrim is ahead of you, not behind you, if you're learning in order. Or you could say Kafish nevaer b'Hilchot Mamrim, or something like that. Yes, you could come to the Rambam with that criticism, and you could say, well, perhaps you could have made it a little bit clearer. Well, maybe you could have, not impossible, but who are we to critique Rambam's truly incredible achievement? So again, really, we will not run into trouble if we always learn all of the Rambam and review it, and we are familiar with it, and then you begin to see the picture in its entirety, which is true of everything really in the Torah as well. I mean, in other words, not in the Rambam. If you learn Mishneh, certain things will be much clearer to you if you learned what it says here in Masechet Shabbat, and also what it says over there in Masechet Eruvin, and then you will know, you'll understand the concept much more completely. So one always has to try and cover all the basic information, and then one understands things much more correctly. All right, we continue. Halacha Yod. I just feel I should mention at this point that I think many people are not sufficiently, I wouldn't just say impressed, I would say stunned by what Rambam was able to do in this Hibur, in this work, Mishneh Torah. The achievement is so overwhelmingly great, covering all the Torah Sheba'al Peh in such a succinct, but on the other hand also such a profound way, because if one knows how to read carefully what Rambam says, one has to get used to the style and the language and what have you, but if one is able to do that, one sees many things that are not written explicitly, but implicitly. And this is, of course, something that all Mefarshim know. So people should just be aware of the unbelievable greatness of Rambam in writing this work, in the same way that one should be completely in awe of Rashi, shall we say, his whether it's his Perush on the Torah, or his Perush on the Talmud, or his Perush on almost the entire Tanakh, I would go so far as to say that one has to achieve a certain level, and not an insignificant level of understanding in Torah to appreciate these things. Otherwise, people can just read Rashi on the Torah and say, "Oh well, he just Chris quoted that Midrash. What's the big deal?" But that is usually a very superficial understanding and shallow understanding of what you see before you. It is reported in the name of Rabbeinu Tam that he said about Rashi, his grandfather, that Perush shel Zekeni ala Talmud af ani aseh kamohu. Rashi's Perush on the Talmud, I could also write something like that. Aval Perush ala Torah lo uchal la'asot kamohu. I could not write such a Perush on the Torah. So if Rabbeinu Tam felt that way, we should appreciate these things and be in awe. And if we are not, then the problem is with us. The Rivash writes in a Teshuvah with regards to Rashi that without Perush Rashi al Talmud, the Talmud would be a Sefer Hathum. It would be almost sealed up before us. We would not be able to approach it. And you can compare this to other Perushim on the Talmud, and it's not the same thing. So that's also something that we should keep in mind. Rambam says now in Halacha Yov, V'chen lo yahlos tefilo b'fnei rabo. A person should not remove his tefillin in his Rav's presence. In other words, you see from here that the assumption is that he is wearing tefillin. That would be the normal thing to do. The problem is not wearing tefillin b'fnei rabo. The problem is taking the tefillin off b'fnei rabo. Quite the opposite of what many people today might assume. Nor should he be mesev. In other words, in a semi-reclining, supine position, such as at the table, bifnei rabo. Because this, both removing the tefillin and being mesev bifnei rabo, can be seen as a lack of respect for the Rav. So, in other words, how should he sit? Yoshev, meaning not recline, as they used to do, semi-recline. Ela Yoshev ke Yoshev lifnei hamelech, as if he's sitting in the presence of the king. I remember seeing on a number of occasions Hagaon Rabbi Avigdor Nevensal, Shashem Yarich et Yomo. Tamid Muvhak of Hagaon Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zatzal. I remember seeing when he stood next to Rabbi Auerbach, he literally behaved like a small child next to his great big father. You felt, you saw this, you sensed it very, very, very clearly, and it was impossible to miss. He should not recite Shemona Esrei standing in front of his Rav, nor behind him, not on the same level in one line, because all this implies as if you see yourselves as equals. Nor should, walking in the street, should he walk right next to him. He should stay back, hang back a little bit, a step behind. Nor should he walk directly behind him. And only then should, finding that position, should one daven. Nor should he enter the bathhouse with his Rav. again, out of respect and awe for his Rav. Halacha Yud Aleph. This will end for today. Lo yeshev b'makom rabo. He should not, as we saw also with regards to one's father, in the Hilchot Mamrim, again, many of the same halachot apply. Lo yeshev b'makom rabo. Should not sit in his place. V'lo yachri'a devaro b'fano. Nor should he express an opinion deciding a matter when the Rav didn't seem to have such a clear opinion. V'lo yistor et dvaro. Nor should he contradict what he said. And if he enters the Rav's presence, he should not sit until the Rav tells him to sit. And if he's learning before him, he should not get up to leave until somehow he hints to the Rav that he needs to go. And the Rav tells him, all right, you may go. Or until somehow he receives permission. So either the Rav tells him, okay, it's time to go, we've finished our shiur for today, you should go now. Or if he has to leave, he indicates to the Rav that he needs to go, and the Rav will give him permission to do so. And when he leaves his Rav's presence, he should not turn his back towards him and go. He should walk backwards, facing his Rav. Similar to what we do at the end of the Shmoneh Esrei, for example. And his Talmud is required to stand when he sees his Rav, even from a distance. As soon as he sees him, if he's sitting, he has to stand up, and he has to remain standing. Let's say the Rav is passing by, until the Rav disappears from his view. And only then may he sit. And also as a sign of respect and to inculcate that connection with the Rav, there should also be hopefully in a normal situation, B'ezat Hashem, there should also be a great ahava between a Rav and his Talmud. Both respect and awe, but also ahava. And therefore, it is proper that a Talmud, at least on the regel, in other words, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, visits his Rav. It doesn't mean he can only do this only on the regel. He can also do it other times, but at least that frequently. I just wanted to add, we see with regards to Elisha that the woman would, the Shunamith would, the husband says to her, Lo Chodesh v'lo Shabbat. In other words, it was common to visit, to be in contact with, to go and hear Divrei Torah from the Navi on Rosh Chodesh, on Shabbat, etc. Obviously, depending on the circumstance, if he's within the Tahum and whatever. But this was a normal this is the way of the world. Yes, question.
In the previous halacha, we learned that you can't daven in the same side by side with one's Rav. Is it correct to assume that that prohibition overrides the fact that one should generally try to pray in front of a wall? So if one's in a room with a rabbi, they should find another place, basically.
It's a good question. First of all, davening in front of a wall, with a wall in front of one, is It's not a chova gemura. It's something which is ra'ui, something which is recommended, but it's not a chova gemura. Whereas kavod rabo is a chova gemura, and therefore I think that takes precedence. That's number one. Number two, usually it's possible to achieve both. In other words, if the Rav is standing right up against the wall, then if you are a little bit behind to the side, step back or something like that, then that's according to what we read, that would be okay. That would be fine. So you may be a little bit further away from the wall than the Rav, but you don't have to be terribly distant, assuming that there's room to move and to do this. All right. Let's say that we'll stop here for today. Hayu beruchim. It's cool. Shalom v'nitzachon.